is an important one. Just going to let this thing start up over here. I apologize. I'm just getting my streaming stuff launching, and we are ready. Okay, so we are talking about the soul. This is a very important topic. It's interesting because there are very few places within Jewish literature and texts where you'll find a lot of conversation about what a neshama, what a Jewish soul is. And Judaism has a lot to say on this, but they're written in very esoteric places. What I want to do for the next coming weeks is have a conversation about the soul. What is Judaism's understanding of a neshama? What is the ultimate expression of Judaism's deeper appreciation for the soul? And we talk a lot about a soul, we talk a lot about a neshama, but we don't really know what it means. So what I want to do is I'm going to break it down for you as easy as possible. When I have this conversation with you, it's going to take us I think 4 or 5 weeks of this conversation. And what I hope is that you walk away with it having a deeper appreciation and understanding of what a neshama, what a soul is. So let's just get to the beginning. This is based on Reuven Bachya, and he tells us something very deep. He says that there are 4 primary physical groups of creation that exist in the world. You have something called domem, which is a silent group, and that is inanimate objects such as mountains and stones and gems and precious metals, diamonds, whatever it is. So you have domem, that's the silent group. Then you have something called someach, which is the vegetative group. This is all kinds of different plant life, moss, grass, shrubs, trees, and that's the second group. So you see there's a hierarchy. You have domem, you have tzomeach. Then you have something called chai. Chai is the living species, and that includes creations that are animals, part of the animal kingdom, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, birds, insects, and lastly, the most exalted of all of the creations is what we call medaber, the speaker, or speaking creations. And the only speaking creation that we are aware of on planet Earth is Adam, the man, or you and I. Man means male and female. Now, these 4 groups are not just categories of creation. Right? These 4 groups are not just, different, distinguished by different characteristics, right? Because if that were the case, then animals would only be different from plants and human beings only different from animals. But rather, these groups are talking about distinct levels in the physical world. Each group is more spiritually elevated than the next. And this is what Reuven Bachya says. And therefore, we talk about a hierarchy that exists in creation. A human being is more elevated than an animal. An animal is more elevated than a plant. A plant is more elevated than a stone. Man represents the pinnacle, the zenith of creation, the apex of creation. A plant is more elevated than a stone. A man is the sitting on the top of everything. So the physical world is created in a way where you have this hierarchy in creation. Now what makes man gives man this very deep, high level of spirituality. So I'm going to get to that, but I want to talk about some observations first. Observations tell us that within each group, there are going to be varying different levels of complexities and sophistication. So for example, plants, right? You have a Venus flytrap. A Venus flytrap is way more complex than a blade of grass. And you'll agree that a dolphin is way more sophisticated than a worm. So this suggests that every animal, even the most simplest animals, they exist on different, more elevated planes than every other single plant. And even more sophisticated than the plants, there are different levels of animals that are higher and higher. So now, there is an inherent and essential difference between animals and plants. The Venus flytrap is like a blade of grass, right? Just like a plant is a member of the vegetative class, okay? But no one would consider a Venus flytrap an animal or part of what we call chai, the living creations group, right? Therefore, a worm, okay? A worm remains an animal and a member of the living class, right? I apologize for the phone ringing. I don't know how to mute it, but second. Okay. Um, so you have a worm which is part of a living class, and that is greater than the plant class. Okay, so you have different levels of complexity. Okay, human beings also have a inherently and essentially different, distinct form and more sophisticated members of its own group of people. So just like an animal is not more sophisticated than a plant, but it is part of an entirely distinct level in creation. A human being is not merely a more sophisticated form of an animal. We're different classes. But unfortunately, many intelligent people make a mistake when it comes to the unique status of man in creation. They think that a human being is just a sophisticated member of the animal kingdom. And by the way, whether or not you believe that to be true is yet to be seen. Okay. And it's not surprising because if you look at a human being, you see only an animal. Okay. And to some degree, I would agree with you that the animal looks like a human being. They share very similar attributes. They both have eyes, they have ears, they have lungs, they have a respiratory system, a heart, cardiovascular, system. You have all of this deep, seated similarities between animals and human beings. So it must be that they're the same. We also share very similar behavioral patterns between these different groups. Okay, humans, like animals, we get angry, we get frustrated, we get excited. Many of man's most basic instincts are shared with animals. Nachmanides tells us that both man and beast instinctively avoid pain and pleasure. This is something that Freud discovered only 100 years ago. Animals and humans are also, we engage in very similar kinds of activities, right? Animals sleep, they eat, they procreate, they go to the bathroom. Certainly, man engages in these activities in a far more complex, sophisticated kind of way than animals do. But regardless, we just look at activities for the sake of activities. They are similar and the same. But essentially, I would argue that man's activities are somewhat elevated. Now, based on this observation, it's easy to conclude that human beings are sophisticated animals, right? And this is what Shlomo Melech says. He says, "Ki mikra b'nei ha'adam mikra behema mikra achad lahem," right? That if you look at this concept of man, he looks like he's just like an animal. There's no difference, okay? And therefore, it's very easy if you look at man in a very superficial kind of way, you could come to the conclusion that he's just a sophisticated animal. To the casual observer, man is no different than an animal. But in truth, man is destined for so much more greater elevation than the existence of the animals. Okay, and he says this, Mi yodea ruach b'nei ha'adam ha'oleh hi lema'ala v'ruach ha'beimah ha'yoredet. Right? We know that the spirit of man is that which ascends on high, while the spirit of the animal is that which descends below the earth. This is in Kohelet. You can look it up yourself. It's in chapter Gimel, chapter 3, 21. Okay, now, the Maharal tells us that as follows. He says that all of creation, all that God created, okay, everything that God did within the world, he created for the sake of man, okay? Everything he creates, all the creations of God's function in the world that he created. Now, each creation has a very different aspect of reality that it expresses. And each creation has its own important individual level of expressing its potential in this world. Now, we are different than every other living creature, okay? because we have a more elevated soul. And I'm going to explain what the soul is. This is more of an introduction. Today, we're just going to go through like a Haggadah, we call it an introduction to this conversation about the soul. But you have to understand the soul within the context of everything else in the world. It's so easy to mistakenly think that you are your urges. It's so easy to mistakenly believe that you are just a sophisticated baboon, okay? When in reality, you're something much, much more. Now, I'm going to argue that there's a spiritual quality that we don't fully understand. And when we begin to think of ourselves in these spiritual terms, okay, it's impossible to see yourself as just being an animal. Now, but so much of man's life is not reflective of his elevated and distinct level. A large amount of man's time is preoccupied with all kinds of things that animals do. Right. And I would argue that because of these preoccupations, many people are completely unaware that they are not a sophisticated animal, but rather a being who has the potential of reaching the infinite. Okay. We have the power of breaking out of our simple physical form. And this is what David HaMelech says. He says, Adam b'yakar v'lo yavin. The King David says, man is precious, but he doesn't understand this. We don't understand how beautiful and valuable we are. We don't understand it. So we are fundamentally different than all other creations. All other creations come into existence. They are going to naturally occupy their destined level. When a plant comes out of the soil, a plant is a plant. It doesn't need to work to become a plant. An animal comes out an animal. An animal's an animal no matter what happens. It doesn't need to develop into becoming an animal. No animal spends its life striving to overcome its plant-like nature. Okay, an animal is an animal. But this is not the case with mankind. On the opposite, man does not naturally become a man. We do not naturally grow into the best expression of ourselves. We got to struggle to overcome your animal-like instinct. And that animal-like instinct draws us away from achieving our human potential. Okay, at birth, I agree with you. Man is simply a higher, elevated form of an animal. He's brought into the world only with the potential of a man. What's our mission? Man's mission is to grow to develop himself into this exalted state, where he could earn his position in creation. Only a man, only humanity is forced to choose to achieve his or her own true identity. So we have a verse in the Torah. This is in Genesis 2:7, Bereshit, Perek Bet, Pasuk Zayin. And it says, the word God created man, a nefesh chaya, a living being, a nefesh chaya. He creates a nefesh chaya min ha'adamah, from the earth. Okay, the word nefesh chaya, right? We used this earlier. God says, let the earth bring forward living beings, nefesh chaya. We see the same thing by the animals. So does mankind not possess any standing over the animal world? They're both considered to be nefesh chaya. Maybe Rabbi, you're wrong. The pasuk says itself that animals will create nefesh chaya. Now, before the Torah tells us that man emerged as a nefesh chaya, the pasuk says something different about mankind. The verse says that God blew into man a breath of life. Okay? He breathes into man a breath of life. And the pasuk implies that it was specifically through this act of blowing, an act not found by other creations of the animals or the other creations on earth. Okay, that man emerged a living being. What did God's breath of life add? How did that breath of life make us not like the animals? So I'm going to explain it to you the way that the Chachamim explained it. So the breath of life that was blown into man contained a force that granted man the potential to occupy a distinct and exalted position in creation. What is that? Okay, at birth, like animals, soul. We are just living beings. And this is why the Torah tells us that you're a nefesh chaya, right? The same description that is used for man and an animal. So at the core, I would agree with you that when we're born, we are nothing but like an animal. But what makes us distinct from the animals is that we are given the potential to be much more than an animal. If man dedicates his life to actualizing this unique potential, he can transcend the animal kingdom. And if he fails to accomplish his goal, he just remains as he emerged into this world like the animals, a mere living being. Okay, so now it's interesting. One other point, this is a fascinating point that you could see in the beginning of Genesis also. When God creates all creatures on earth, he ends it, ki tov, and it was good. However, when he made man, there is no mention of ki tov. Think about that. The animals were created, God says, ki tov. The earth, ki tov. The plants, ki tov. But when, ki tov ma'od. But when animal, no mention of tov at all. Why is that? Why is there no mention of man's goodness in creation? And listen to what the rabbis say. This is a deep idea. The Kli Yakar tells us that it was good. When we say ki tov, that refers to a state of completion, that something was full, finished, complete. And that term, ki tov, cannot be stated. It's not relevant to man. Why? Because, my friends, at birth, man does not emerge a complete person. Until he overcomes his animalistic state, until he overcomes his nature, only after actualizing his potential, and he assumes that elevated position and the hierarchy of creation, could we call man good. Only when you choose to become good are you described as good. And this fundamental point in creation of man is reflected in the Torah's name for mankind, Adam. Adam was the name of the first human being and became the name of all of humanity. The Maharal says that the word Adam comes from the Hebrew word Adama, which means earth or ground, right? Now, this name is so appropriate for man because he was created from the ground, right? And God formed man from the dust of the earth. But on a deeper level, man is associated with ground because the dust of the ground is the paradigm for the nature, for the development of the raw potential within man. When a seed is placed in the ground, right, the ground's nutrients work in tandem with the proper external influences, such as water, sunlight, to draw out from the seed the potential. With the right setting, the ground is able to facilitate the seed and growing into a tree to produce fruits. The very essence of the ground is that it provides an environment for something to maximize its potential. The same is true with human beings. The very essence of man is that he exists to maximize his or her potential. At birth, you're like a fallow field, empty, right? Just sitting there latent with potential. But with hard work and time, an empty field can become a lush garden, an orchard, a vineyard. So too with man, with work, time, and effort, a man can be actualized into his fullest potential and assume this exalted state in creation. Like the ground that turns a seed into a towering tree, man is endowed with a unique ability and charged with the responsibility to nourish the capabilities within himself to grow to the greatest heights possible. You know, we say that we are like the dust of the earth, right? And the dust is a negative thing. But over here, we're saying the dust is a reminder for the potential of man, because man is like the tree. Ki Adam etz hasadeh. Man is like the tree of the field, right? We know from Isaiah that we will enjoy the fruits of their actions, was referring to the righteous people whose deeds are like fruits. Okay, so we can achieve something that no one else can achieve. We can choose to become something more. And what happens, God forbid, if we don't take this path? What happens if we fail to achieve this potential, God forbid? When our existence is not dedicated to transcending the animals, when we become content with acting like a sophisticated baboon rather than an elevated human being, we default on our elevated status. Yeah. and we are relegated to the domain of the lower creations that we fail to transcend. This degradation of man, right, is what the Torah says itself. If you look closer at the end of when God talks about destroying the world again during the time of Noah, he says, "Vayomer Hashem lo yidon ruach ba'adam leolam b'shagam hu basar." Right? He says that my spirit will not contend anymore concerning man, since he is but flesh. And his days, yamav me'av esrim shana, his days will only be 120 years. The Ramban, Nachmanides, tells us the Torah uses this word basar, flesh, to draw an equation between mankind and the animals. Because the human population at the time of the flood, they failed to pursue an elevated potential state of mankind. They surrendered to their animalistic base interests. Man was no longer elevated. He was just an animal. He was just flesh, basar. If you fail to elevate yourself, if you fail to strive for greatness, you're nothing but an animal. But when you're able to go ahead and reach your potential, right, not only are you overcoming this base state, you have the power of reaching into the spiritual realms and literally sit and become one with God. Okay, so what are we talking about over here? We talk about the neshama. What makes man unique from all other creations? What is the force within man that empowers him to not only be a sophisticated animal, but to strive for this elevated reality that he can accomplish? Now, I'm going to say that unlike plants and animals, all other creatures that are in the world that we live in, man was created with B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. Okay, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? Obviously, God has no image. Every school child knows that we don't believe that God has a form. Hashem is here, Hashem is there. He's truly everywhere because he has no form, right? But being created in the image of God represents a deeper metaphysical, godly quality. Okay, now God formed man from the dust of the earth, and he blew into his nose the breath of life. Nishmat v'itzar Hashem Elokim et ha'adam, afar min ha'adama, v'ipach ba'apav nishmat chayim. And he blew into him this spirit of life. So our sages tell us, the Chachamim tell us, that what is the breath of life? That is a divine soul. The word neshama, okay, or nishma, right? This blowing, nishmat chaim, is the same word as neshama. You have an elevated soul that nothing else has, no other creature has. And this neshama is buried within you. It's the source of your life. It's what allows you to be animated. It's what gives you the power to think. It's what gives you this unique position in creation. Okay, the neshama is what separates you from everything else. On the first level, neshama manifests itself as the intellectual force within mankind. And that force provides man with unique intellectual capabilities. And this is what gives him the ability of, becoming a master of his domain. The secondary manifestation of this neshama is that it grants man a divine element. Okay, the element that provides man with spiritual qualities to empower him to transcend the material physical world. In this manifestation, neshama is a transcendent force that transforms man from a physical being into a divine-like being. You become greater than the malachim, than the angels. So to truly be elevated and to fully embody one's humanity, a man has to engage both manifestations of the neshama, the intellect and the divine. He has to develop his intellect and to cultivate his divine-like qualities. And that's what we're going to do together in the next few weeks. Okay, man inherently is elevated than any other form of creation in this world. And when we're looking out at the universe and we're seeing so much of life and different life forces, you are not like them. You're not higher evolutionary form of an animal and a plant and so on and so forth. We reject that idea. We buy into this idea that you have the ability of becoming God-like, and you do that, you achieve that through understanding the potential of the power of your soul. And what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks is I'm going to break it down for you, every single aspect of the soul. And I want to show you how if you just ignore what you truly are, then you might be just a sophisticated animal. And that's fine. If you want to be in a zoo with a bunch of crazy people running around doing animal-like things, that's your choice. When we lower ourselves and just think that we are an expression of our emotion, we are allowing ourselves to become more animalistic. When we subscribe to the higher functions of the mind and the soul, and we choose to become not just the emotional aspects of our being, but we choose to connect to the higher spiritual form that we each express, this is how we transcend the physical. This is how we leave the basar behind, and instead we become a nefesh chaya that is tov. It's only through choice. Think about it for a minute. What makes you you? Okay, are you just an expression of your wants? Are you just an expression of your needs? What motivates your actions? If you're just getting by leaning on your natural gifts and talents, you are not living a meaningful life. But if you're here, it's because you're looking for a life of meaning. If you're here, it's because you want to achieve greatness, gadlut ha'adam. And that, my friends, could only happen through understanding what your full potential is and then actualizing it. So God willing, together over the next few weeks, we'll try to double click on this, expand our understanding of the Shema, and walk away choosing to be exalted members of the highest class, the apex class of creation, a neshama, and not just the body. Wishing you an amazing week. It's Wednesday, so I could wish you all a Shabbat Shalom already. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. Please join me on Friday at 1 p.m. for auction for the soul on the parasha. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Otherwise, have an amazing day. Reflect on the fact that you, my friends, are a luminous being that expresses light, not this crude matter, not this earthy, dusty stuff. Have a great day, everybody. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.